There's a story written about Epictetus and his master. His master, a man named Epictetus, himself a freed man who had risen to become a secretary in Nero's court, was twisting Epictetus's leg. Perhaps as punishment, perhaps as demonstration, perhaps simply because he could. Epictetus said calmly, "If you continue twisting, you're going to break it." Epictetus continued twisting until the leg snapped. Epictetus said, "I told you so." And that was all. No cry, no pleading, no rage. Just a statement of fact. Here's what's happening, here's what I predicted. All delivered in the same tone any man might use in casual conversation. Whether or not this story is true, it's almost a perfect example or image of the philosophical position that Epictetus spent his entire life articulating. The body can be broken. It was never yours to begin with. What is yours? The only thing that has ever truly been yours is your mind. Welcome back to the Stoic Mind Mechanic. My name's Tim Howell. In our last two episodes, we spent time with Seneca, one of the most brilliant, most complicated and most recognisably human figures in the entire Stoic tradition. A man who wrote magnificently about simplicity while living in luxury, who advised a tyrant while writing about virtue, and who knew with unflinching self-awareness that the gap between the philosophy and his practice was enormous. Today we meet someone who had no such gap, not because he was morally superior, though he probably was, but because he had no luxury to retreat to, no wealth to compromise him, and no political power to corrupt him. Epictetus was a slave, and the philosophy he developed from being enslaved is possibly the most rigorous and most demanding account of human freedom from the ancient world. We know very little about Epictetus's early life. He was born around 50 AD in Hierapolis, a city in southwestern Turkey, and was brought to Rome as a slave, probably as a young child. His name itself is not a name in any conventional sense. In Greek, epiktetos simply means acquired. It's the word you might use for any piece of property that has come into your possession. His owner in Rome was Epictetus, a man from the story, an influential freedman who served as an administrative official under Nero. It's one of the great ironies of Stoic history that Epictetus had himself been a slave who bought his freedom and still chose to own his own slave. At some point during his years in Rome, Epictetus attended the lectures of the Stoic philosopher Musonius Rufus, possibly with Epictetus' permission or through his own initiative in whatever hours of free time he was allowed. Musonius was one of the most respected philosophical teachers of his era, and what Epictetus heard in those lectures changed the entire trajectory of his life. At some point, Epictetus gained his freedom. We don't know whether his master died or he bought his freedom. What we know is that by the time he appears clearly in the historical record, he's a free man, poor, physically disabled from the injury to his leg, and teaching philosophy. In 89 AD, the Emperor Domitian expelled all philosophers from Rome, a recurring political gesture by emperors who found philosophers raised too many questions with the people about the abuse of power. Epictetus left. He settled in Nicopolis, a city on the northwestern coast of Greece, and there he opened his own school. It was not a grand institution, it was a room. Students came from across the Roman Empire to sit in it, including, according to some accounts, the young man who would later become emperor himself and write the book we now know as Meditations, though that connection is debated. What is not debated is the influence. Within a generation, the school at Nicopolis had produced the most widely read and most practically applied body of Stoic teaching in the tradition's history. Epictetus wrote nothing himself. Everything we have comes from the notes taken by his student Arrian, who compiled them into two surviving works: the Discourses, 4 books of lecture notes and classroom dialogues, and the Enchiridion, the handbook. Small, compressed, relentless. We'll spend a full episode on the Enchiridion, Today we're here to look at the man and his central ideas. The Enchiridion opens with what is one of the single most important sentences in all of Stoic literature. It's the first thing that Arrian chose to record. It's the foundation on which everything else in Epictetus's teaching rests. Based on the translation from Higginson, Epictetus writes, "Some things are in our control and others are not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, reputation, command, and in one word, whatever are not our own actions." This is what philosophers call the dichotomy of control, and I want to spend some time on this because it's become simplified in ways that strip it of most of its true meaning. The popular version runs something like this: focus on what you can control and let go of what you can't, which is fine advice as far as it goes, but Epictetus is making a considerably stronger and stranger claim. He's saying that the things we typically regard as the most important in our lives, our health, our social standing, our professional outcomes, other people's opinions of us, even our own bodies, these are not ours. They never were. They belong to a different category entirely, the category of things that happen to us rather than things we do. What is ours, what has always been ours, and can't be taken away by any master, any emperor, any disease, or any catastrophe, is the use we make of our own mind, our judgments, our desires, our responses, our character. He continues in the Enchiridion to say, "The things in our control are by nature free, unrestrained, unhindered, but those not in our control are weak, slavish, restrained, belonging to others. Remember then that if you suppose that things which are slavish by nature are also free, and that what belongs to others is your own, then you will be hindered, you will lament, you will be disturbed, and you will find fault both with gods and men." Slavish by nature, belonging to others. There's a particular weight to those phrases when you consider who's saying them. A man who was classified by Roman law for most of his life as an object belonging to another person. He's not using the language of slavery metaphorically. He has lived the life he's describing, and he's saying that the most important thing, even in legal and physical enslavement, the essential thing, the only thing that constituted his freedom as a rational being, his mind was untouched. This is either one of the most profound observations ever made about human consciousness, or a rationalization so extreme it becomes complicit in suffering. That tension is real, and we'll return to it, but hold the idea first in its strongest form before we interrogate it. One of the reasons Epictetus has been so influential on modern psychology, and we'll explore that in depth when we reach our episode on cognitive behavioural therapy, is that he developed a sophisticated account of how the mind actually works when it encounters the world. He uses the Greek word phantasia, translated as impression or appearance. Every event that reaches our consciousness does so first as an impression, a raw presentation of something happening. The impression arrives before we have done anything with it, before we've judged it, interpreted, or responded to it. What we do next, the judgment we form about the impression, the meaning we assign to it, that's where our freedom lives. That is what is in our control. Epictetus says, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. For example, death is nothing terrible, else it would have seemed so to Socrates. But the terror consists in our opinion of death. So men are disturbed not by things, but by their opinions about things." This sentence, written sometime around 108 AD, is the direct ancestor of the words that Albert Ellis would use 1800 years later when founding rational emotive behaviour therapy. That psychological disturbances arise not from events themselves, but from the irrational beliefs we hold about them. The practical implication is radical. If I'm upset, it's not just because of what happened, It's because of how I see it. That means my feelings aren't completely out of my control. I can look at what I believe and question it. I can ask myself, is this really as bad as I think it is? Or am I calling it a disaster because I've put too much importance on something that was never really mine to begin with? If my distress is not caused by what happens to me, but what I believe about what happens to me, then my distress is accessible to me. I can examine the belief. I can ask whether it's accurate. I can ask whether the thing I am calling a catastrophe is genuinely a catastrophe, or whether it's something I am calling a catastrophe because I have placed excessive value on something that was never truly mine. This is not a denial of suffering. Epictetus doesn't say bad things don't hurt. He says the quality and duration of your suffering is shaped by the judgments you make about what is happening to you. And those judgments can be trained. Training them is what the philosophical life is for. I said a moment ago that the tension in Epictetus's position is real, and I want to face that directly. There is a common reading of the dichotomy of control that I would disagree with, that amounts to the following. Whatever happens to you externally is not your concern. Your enslavement, your poverty, your oppression, the injustice served to you by those with power over your body, none of that is what truly matters. What matters is your inner response, and so the appropriate reaction to injustice is equanimity. If that's what Epictetus means, it's a philosophy that serves power, a philosophy that teaches the oppressed to accommodate their oppression rather than resist it, and that would be a serious moral failure. I don't think that's what Epictetus means. But I think that the risk of that interpretation is real enough to name and address it. The dichotomy of control does not say accept injustice. It says recognize the difference between what you can and cannot change and direct your energy accordingly. Epictetus himself was not passive. He ran a school that produced students who went back into the world and engaged with it politically, professionally, philosophically. He taught that justice is a virtue, one of the 4 cardinal virtues, and that our obligations to the common good are not optional. What the dichotomy protects against is not engagement with the world, but the kind of unregulated emotional investment in outcomes that destroy the person doing the engaging. The activist who burns out in rage at a system that's slow to change, or the reformer who, because they can't fix everything immediately, concludes that nothing's worth attempting, or the person who, because they can't control how others respond to them, stops acting with integrity. The dichotomy of control is not advice to be passive. It suggests strategic sanity. Do what you can with what is yours in the circumstances. Hold the outcome loosely. Imperfect action is better than perfect inaction. Before I close, I want to draw a line between Epictetus and the man who read him most closely. Marcus Aurelius, who we'll meet in our next episode, was Emperor of Rome. He became the most powerful man in the Western world, and in his private diaries, in notebooks that we now call meditations, written to himself and never intended for publication, he quotes Epictetus more than any other thinker. A slave and an emperor reaching the same conclusions from opposite ends of the social universe. I find something moving about that, not because it proves Stoicism right in any formal philosophical sense, but because it demonstrates something about the nature of the ideas themselves, that they are genuinely universal. They don't depend on your circumstances for their validity. They don't require privilege to be true or poverty to be authentic. They are available to anyone with the honesty to examine their own mind and the courage to act on what they find. I believe that this is Epictetus's deepest gift to us, not the specific doctrines, though they are remarkable, not the uncompromising prose, but the demonstration, lived and embodied, that the philosophical life is not a luxury. It's not something you do when circumstances permit. It's something you do regardless of circumstance, or you don't do it at all. In his words, seek not that the things which happen should happen to you as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life. There is one more thing about Epictetus I want you to carry with you from this episode. He was, by all accounts, a remarkably gentle teacher in person. His directness in the texts, the refusal to let students off the hook, the spare, almost abrasive prose, coexisted with a genuine warmth in the classroom. He cared about his students, not in a sentimental way, but in the way a good doctor cares about a patient, with honesty, with the willingness to cause temporary discomfort in service of genuine health. He took in an abandoned baby in his old age and raised it with an old woman companion as his own child. This from a man who wrote about the dangers of excessive attachment. He was not a theorist of cold detachment. He was a person who loved carefully with open eyes, loving the people and the life he had, rather than the people and the life he wished he had. That distinction, loving what is rather than grieving what is not, is perhaps the most practically demanding idea in the whole Stoic tradition, and it's the one that most reliably separates genuine philosophical practice from philosophical posturing. Your reflection for this episode: take the dichotomy of control and apply it to one specific source of stress in your life right now. One, just one, not a list. Ask yourself honestly, is this thing genuinely in my control, or am I treating something that belongs to the category of external events as if it were my job to fix? And if it's not fully in your control, is there something within it that is? In our next episode, we meet Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, the most powerful man in the world, the man who wrote the most famous Stoic text in a private diary that he never meant anyone to read. His story is everything that Epictetus' story isn't. External grandeur, enormous power, the weight of empire, and yet privately both have the same struggles, the same practice, the same daily effort to be better than yesterday. If today was useful, please like and subscribe. It costs nothing and helps this channel reach the people who may need it. So in the meantime, keep calm, keep stoic, and I'll see you in the next one.